A copy of, oh, here you go. Oh, we got to sign in too, okay. He takes attendance? Kind of. Good morning.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? All right. I think we'll get, if it's okay with you, I think we'll get started. That sound good? Okay. Welcome to part 2. We're going to focus on today home missions. And why don't we start with a prayer? Lord God, Heavenly Father, we thank you that the good news of our salvation in Christ has come to us, that the message of Christ for us has come to us, and that you have given us the privilege as a church and a church body to proclaim that message, that it goes out through us to places around our country. As we look at the spread of the gospel by our synod over these last 175 years in America, help us to appreciate the blessings you have given us and to inspire us to continue supporting mission work around across our country. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so today we're moving on to, whoops, let's get back a couple slides here. Home missions is going to be our focus today. So in a way, one could say every congregation somewhere along the line is kind of a home mission. It kind of started out that way in different ways. Sometimes it's a daughter congregation. Sometimes it's sending out an exploratory pastor, or it's a group of people who request, come and help us. There have just been a lot of different ways that home missions have gotten started. Now, when it comes to our synod was kind of a mission synod in a way, because in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, and a few decades after that, German immigrants were simply flooding into America. This chart kind of gives you an idea of the number of German immigrants coming to America. And a lot of them are landing in Wisconsin. I think the German immigration, I think it would be safe to say, is a reason why that Wisconsin became a state in 1848, because you just have this massive influx. And you notice some of the decades where they're really coming in. 1850s, 1880s, just times you're going to just see an explosion of then Lutheran churches being organized, and particularly in the upper Midwest, because a lot of them are gathering here. Now, the question, I think, just to kind of kick it off, to get you talking a little bit and thinking, why do you think, particularly in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, why a lot of Germans might be immigrating to America, and maybe even particularly Wisconsin?
It had to do with the German government and war, and I don't quite remember what they wanted to get out.
Yeah, she mentioned German government. At the time, up until 1871, Germany was not unified, not a unified nation, very fractured, which meant a lot of different powers are at work trying to gain the upper hand, so that meant a lot of warfare. So I think a lot of families were kind of tired of sending their sons to be cannon fodder in these various wars. And so how can we escape that? Maybe one way is come to America to escape some of those political stuff going on. Any other reasons you might think of, especially if you think of what's Germany and Europe like in those days compared to maybe America?
She said opportunity.
Opportunities, yes, absolutely. Economic opportunities. It was really hard in Europe at that time to move up in society, and frankly, there just wasn't a lot of land. I mean, the land has kind of all been gobbled up, and America is I mean, we got land all over the place, and especially Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana. Those are places that have a lot of land, and then just continuing to move west. So the land and the opportunity for economic advancement. There were some who came over, maybe to escape problems. You got a marriage problem, maybe we can get away, or if somebody got in trouble, had trouble with the law, well, you put an ocean between you and the authorities. That can go a long way to maybe having a new start. So there are some people like that. There were a few, particularly a group who settled in Missouri, and then another group that came over and settled. Initially, they settled in Buffalo, but some came over to Wisconsin and settled in a place called Freistadt, which is today Mequon. And a few even a little bit late, a couple of years later in the 1840s, came and settled in a place called Kirkine, which today is Jackson, and started a church called David Starr. A few settled in Lebanon, Wisconsin, and Cedarburg, places like those people, those groups came over because they wanted to escape religious oppression. The government in Germany was trying to force Lutherans and Reform together. We heard a little bit about that last week. And they wanted to get away from that. They wanted to be someplace where they could just be good confessional Lutherans. And so some of them came and formed the Missouri Synod and formed the Buffalo Synod. The Wisconsin Synod gets formed because you had a number of pastors, I think I maybe mentioned this last week, who didn't like those strict Lutherans and wanted to start our own place, our own synod. And frankly, there were so many German immigrants coming over, there was room to work. And so we're going to see that starts happening. Now, we mentioned last time, one of the challenges that our synod is going to have early on is going to be lack of manpower. That's going to be kind of an ongoing theme, that there will be just kind of this constant lack of manpower. And it sounds kind of familiar today. We've still got a little, that kind of ebbs and flows. And again, we're kind of struggling with vacancy rates. The other thing is lack of funding. Over in Germany, how was the church funded? It's funded by government, taxes. Your taxes paid for the church, paid for the pastor's salary, paid for the building upkeep, and so on. You come to America, that isn't the case anymore. And so it took a while for Wisconsin Synod Lutherans and just Christians in general to realize and learn the idea that we have to voluntarily give offerings that are going to support our pastor and support the synod to do mission work. So that's always going to be a challenge. Now, these early pastors were they almost all of them had they came from mission societies and they just had a mission heart. And a lot of them are going to go on different traveling throughout Wisconsin to try to organize German Lutheran families into congregations and try to serve them. A couple of the early pastors, a guy over there on the left, Karl Goldammer, he ended up starting churches in the Manitowoc area, was the first place he went. So he started, and it was kind of funny how they often went. They started out in the country, so he started a congregation in the town of Liberty, Trinity and Liberty, which is kind of near Valders, west of Manitowoc. And then he started Newtonburg, St. John's, which is again kind of out in the country. But then he moved into the city, into Manitowoc, and started First German Lutheran in Manitowoc. I served there for 5 years. And that church is the one that became, grew and daughtered some other churches over the years. The guy in the middle there is Philip Kaler. Philip Kaler came over, and also a guy who's going to be doing some traveling around. Eventually, he was actually pastor in First German in Manitowoc. But he's also going to be doing some traveling around, trying to group people together. He travels kind of in the area of West Bend, up in that area. The guy on the right, Johannes Bading, we saw his picture last week, a little bit older picture of him. But as a younger pastor, he's also doing some traveling around, besides being first stationed in what was called Calumet, kind of west of Lake Winnebago. And then he served and started a church in Teresa, south of Fond du Lac. And then eventually he lands in Watertown. But he's also traveling around. Eventually, the synod actually called a kind of a permanent, his main call was to be a traveling preacher. The German for it is Reiseprediger. This guy was the first one, a guy named Gottlieb Fachtmann. And so he would travel. You can see kind of the route he traveled, kind of along Lake Michigan, up along Lake Winnebago, up into the Fox River Valley. That's kind of these were places where people were moving. And so a guy like Fachtmann is going and making these travels, trying to gather congregations. And then once you had one gathered, he would go back and try to serve them as best he could. We're still having, the challenges getting permanent pastors at these places, but we're still trying to get congregations started. Later on, he goes on another trip, goes as far as up as far as Algoma. He'll start a church in Kewanee as well. Go over then back to the Fox River Valley area. Then later in early 1860s, he actually goes over to La Crosse and works his way up the Mississippi River Valley and ends up going over into Minnesota too. So you had a guy like Fachtmann who's traveling all over the place like this, and so when you read histories of a lot of Wisconsin Synod congregations in some of these areas, they'll mention Gottlieb Fachtmann as the first guy who got them organized, got them gathered these immigrants together. And this is, some historians have questioned, how much is this really mission work? I mean, you're gathering baptized Christians already together, Lutherans, they're Lutherans, they're Germans, for getting them together. But remember, these people, often their concern isn't so much spiritual things, but day-to-day subsistence. They're trying to start a farm. They're trying to get life organized here. And so it was a work of the pastors to try to get them to come to church and instruct their children and baptize and so on. And so there's this kind of this tension there sometimes where they're trying to survive, but also trying to get them to remember what you learned growing up back in Germany. You got your catechism, you got your hymnal. Let's focus on that as much as we can. Another guy who's going to be is our guy Moldenke. We heard about him last week as the first president of the seminary, first professor and president of the seminary. He was also a Reiseprediger. He ended up going up to places like Wausau. And so a church gets started up there west of Wausau, Marathon, St. Matthew's in Marathon, which is still there today. My grandfather Otto served there as his last congregation, or last church he served was in St. Matthew's in Marathon. And so he lived in that part. He and my grandma lived in that parsonage. I remember going visiting there when I was a real little kid. But you also had one of the ways that after you start getting churches established, a way to expand work was often through daughtering congregations. And so you'll get an established church like St. John's. This is St. John's. The church on the building on the left, the picture on the left, it was their original church building. It was actually on 4th and Highland, which is basically where the Pfizer Forum is now. And then they relocated to 8th and Valete in the late 1880s and built what's there today, St. John on the Hillside, which is still there today. They daughtered a congregation that actually started out not as a church, a branch school north of them called, anybody guess? Kind of on Palmer Street? St. Marcus. Yes, St. Marcus was actually kind of started out as a daughter school, a branch school of St. John's, and then it became its own congregation they just celebrated their 150th, so it was 1875 that they ended up forming a congregation. So you had similar situations like that all over the Synod, and that really has been something that's kind of continued on, that you have this idea of congregation that's established and then sees an opportunity somewhere else and daughters a congregation there. Any number of places you can see that, how that happened. I'll use Manitowoc again as an example because I was pastor there. First German daughtered a church on the north side in the 1920s called Emmanuel Lutheran. The only problem is Emmanuel didn't join the Synod. So then they daughtered Grace Lutheran, which was a few blocks away. And then they daughtered in 1940s, early 1940s, on the west side, Bethany Lutheran. Grace eventually relocated to a different part of town, so you've got 4 congregations in Manitowoc the mother church was First German and daughtered these other churches that are now there. In fact, 2 of the 3 daughters are now bigger than First German was. So that's kind of sometimes how that happens. You can see similar things in Appleton and in Fond du Lac and La Crosse, all sorts of places like that, where you had a kind of a mother church, and then you daughter them from there. When you look at how our synod expands, so this kind of thing is going on in Wisconsin. It's also going on in Michigan, Minnesota. This kind of, you often had these traveling preachers, gathering immigrants, trying to gather congregations, and some getting established, and then some daughtering congregations. We expand geographically, or the first kind of geographic change or move into a different state will be a group that goes to Nebraska. The story of going to Nebraska is interesting. How do we end up with so many churches we have quite a few churches in Nebraska, a Nebraska district? It's because actually there was a group of farming families in Ixonia, near Watertown, who were basically fed up with all the intra-Lutheran fighting that was going on among different congregations and different synods. They just kind of got sick of it. There was Wisconsin, there was Minnesota, there was Ohio Synod, there was the Buffalo Synod. They weren't all getting along as well in the early 1860s. So they decided to just get in their wagons and go west. And they brought a pastor with them, the guy on the left, Pastor Heckendorf, and they settled and formed the community of Norfolk, Nebraska, and started a church there, St. Paul's, Norfolk, Nebraska. So that's a picture of their original church building dating back there to 1878. And so that kind of became the mother church of that synod. Now, the problem was when their pastor, Heckendorf, died, all right, where are we going to get another pastor from? Well, they reached out to the Wisconsin Synod and the president at Northwestern College, August Ernst, and said, can you help us? And he said, well, I think we got a candidate from the seminary that might be able to go out to help you. And Michael Pankow was the guy who went out there and served them then for another couple decades. Interesting, Michael Pankow's descendants, I don't know how many greats it would be, grandson just graduated from the seminary last year and got assigned out to Laramie, Wyoming. His dad's classmate of mine who serves in Bay City, Michigan. So you just kind of see these families sometimes kind of carry on the work. And so from that church in Norfolk then, we get other churches like Emmanuel and Hayter, Nebraska, and just a number of other congregations because other German immigrant families and others were going to settle out in Nebraska. And so we end up getting a number of churches founded. And eventually, by the 1890s, they will form their own synod. The Nebraska District Synod, they called themselves. And they'll be part of that federation in the 1890s that kind of works together with the Wisconsin Synod. The story of going farther west is kind of interesting. We've had churches in the Pacific Northwest for longer than you would expect. The guy on the left there, Friedrich Wolf, was an Ohio Synod pastor who got sent out to Tacoma, Washington to start a church. There was a group of German immigrant families that requested a pastor, and so he went out as an Ohio Synod pastor. And they started a church, St. Paul's Lutheran. And then he kind of this was 1884. And it seems that he was either kind of forgotten by the Ohio Synod or he didn't like where the doctrinal position of the Ohio Synod was shifting. And so he reached out to the Wisconsin Synod for help. And the Wisconsin Synod said, all right, this gives us a foothold in a new location. And so we started supporting him. There was a little bit of tension with us and the Missouri Synod because the Missouri Synod was doing work out there too, and they sometimes felt, are we infringing on their territory? So a little tension that they had to be worked out. But eventually they're okay, we can each work in our own places there. And so from there, we get other churches founded. So for example, in the early 1900s, we'll have a church, Grace Lutheran, in Yakima, Washington. And we ended up getting other congregations, primarily in the smaller towns. A lot of the smaller towns, we didn't get into places like Seattle and Spokane until a little bit later, in the 30s or 40s, we started getting into some of those places. But this gives us a foothold out in the Pacific Northwest. Now, I mention that here because we've got a new synod president in 1908, a guy named Gustav Bergemann. And you might recall we've got this federation of synods, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and now Nebraska. They're kind of doing some things together. We're doing worker training together. As we'll see next week, they're going to do world mission work together in Apache land. They kind of start to think maybe we should just merge the whole thing and become one entity instead of 3 synods or 4 synods kind of working together loosely. So they finally decide to do that and formally merge in 1917. What this did was then, what they decided to do was, okay, we're going to divide up into districts. So the Michigan Synod will become the Michigan District. The Minnesota Synod will become the Minnesota District. The Nebraska Synod will become the Nebraska District. And we'll take Wisconsin and divide it up into 3. So now we've got 3 synods, or 3 districts: Western Wisconsin, Northern Wisconsin, and of course, do we need help here? Is it underneath? Okay. Then we've got the Southeastern Wisconsin District. So this is this new federated thing. So we start out with 6 districts. But within a year, we're going to add district number 7, 1918, the Pacific Northwest District. Now, if you look at that picture there, the guy front and center, you can see Gustav Bergemann. The synod president, Gustav Bergemann, now he gets elected as the president of this the new merged synod. They called it the Joint Evangelical Lutheran Synod of Wisconsin and Other States. Well, actually, its original name was Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, and Other States. They decided we should probably shorten that, and they dropped the Michigan and Minnesota, so it was Joint Evangelical Lutheran Synod of Wisconsin and Other States. Not a very good acronym. They finally, what we call now WELS, they finally settled on that in 1959, Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod. But Bergemann made it a point of getting to every district in the first 2 years of this merged synod. He says he traveled something like 22,000 miles on trains during those first 2 years, because he went out there, he went out to Nebraska, he went out to actually Arizona to visit the Apache land and some of our missions out there, and then of course Michigan and Minnesota. So he made the rounds in those first 2 years. So this was the gathering of the Pacific Northwest District. Meanwhile, the Minnesota Synod is also starting to look west and seeing that there's some there's Lutheran immigrants that are settling in the Dakotas. And so they send a traveling missionary, the guy on the left there, Christian Betcher. He's kind of regarded as sort of the father of the Dakota mission work. And he's going to travel all sorts of places in the Dakotas, starting congregations. The picture on the right there is Goose Camp, South Dakota. This little gathering there. And from what I understand, they actually were doing some outreach among Native Americans, and there were some Native Americans who were baptized at that congregation in its early years. It doesn't exist anymore. A lot of these Dakota churches haven't survived. A number of them have, but some haven't. This map is kind of cool just because it shows where pastors were stationed and what other churches they were serving and which ones were self-supporting, which ones were mission churches. And you can see some places on there, Mobridge is mentioned, Watertown, South Dakota, Roscoe, and then up into North Dakota. And there's another map that's at the Synod building in the archives that has little push pins in it too that differentiate where the Missouri Synod was working and where the Wisconsin Synod is working. So we kind of divided up the territory, tried to divide up the place to try to keep out of each other's way. But you can see the kind of places that are being served. So this is a picture here of Roscoe, St. Paul's in Roscoe, South Dakota. That was on the day of their dedication of their church in the 1890s. So by 1920, there's enough critical mass of churches in the Dakotas that they form the Dakota-Montana District. So now we're up to 8 districts. And it's going to stay at 8 for a little while, for about 34 years. We'll be at 8. So mission work's happening. It's also happening in other places as especially urban areas in the Midwest are growing. Milwaukee, Detroit, Minneapolis, the Twin Cities. So Milwaukee, all sorts of different churches are formed. Already in the 1890s in the Milwaukee area, you have, this is the Sunday School Teachers of Jordan in West Dallas. And then in the 1920s, you'll see, 19-teens, Nain gets started. 1920s, you add Woodlawn and Good Shepherds. And now those churches, Woodlawn, Good Shepherds, and Jordan, have merged to form Living Hope just a few years ago. So just kind of interesting how those things happen. You also had, in I believe my date right, 1930, the Ruby Street Mission. Oh no, Garden Homes. Garden Homes gets started before that, 1920s. Same with Mount Lebanon. Mount Lebanon's in the 1920s as well. But then this Ruby Street Mission, and I was reading up on that. The history here is fascinating, actually. That it was the district, from what I understand, the district mission board wanted to start a church here, but the synod said no. We don't have enough money because now you're 1929-30, the money is a little tight. But 2 of the pastors on the district mission board, one of them I think was John Jeske, so I'm assuming that would be the grandfather of Pastor Mark Jeske at St. Marcus. He and another guy actually bought with their own money a couple of lots on, I think it was like 39th and Ruby. And then they got the old Garden Homes Chapel they were building a different church, and so they moved it to that location. And that was the first church building, that's what you see there, and served kind of as a chapel and school. The only problem was they outgrew it pretty quickly, plus the city condemned it, so they couldn't use it. So they said, okay, let's build a new building, but the lots there weren't zoned for church, so then they instead, and by this time I think the Synod Mission Board got involved, and they bought this piece of property and built that church, which also served as the school. And I believe they built a parsonage next to it too, eventually. So just kind of interesting. And then, of course, they named it Church, the Lutheran Church of the Atonement, I think is what it's called. What was the official? Yeah. And the first pastor, or the resident pastor, was William Schaefer. Took the call here and served for many years, and then his son served here. I know Jeb Schaefer as well. So just kind of interesting. You see things like this going on in the city. Detroit, there were a number of new missions that were started in Detroit in the 20s and 30s. I always love this picture. This is Hope Lutheran Church in Detroit. The pastor there was Wilmar Valesky. That would be the father of former seminary president David Valesky. He was a tireless missionary, and they would send out that school bus on Sunday mornings to pick up Sunday school kids. They had like 200 kids in their Sunday school in the 1930s. The Twin Cities also saw a number of new churches being formed at that time in the 20s and 30s. Places, I believe, like Mount Olive and Pilgrim, I think, was another church in the Twin Cities that were started at this time as well. The 1930s, it was kind of tough to do mission work. 1920s was a little bit better, and actually the first place we're going to start doing mission work, again, way outside of the Midwest, will be Arizona. That was a natural place to do it since we had the Apache mission there since the 1890s, and so we started to do mission work in Arizona. So churches in Phoenix date back to the early, first decade, 2 decades of the 1900s. Another church that's very old there, that's still there, is Grace in Glendale. That dated back to the 1920s. This is a early picture of their school children at Grace in Glendale, Arizona. So we were doing some expansion work, and even in the 1930s, when money was tight, we were still trying to do some work in Arizona. We also started doing work, surprisingly, in the 1930s. Again, Depression era, hard to do mission work. We started doing mission work in Colorado. Again, kind of jumping off from Nebraska. in some of the places in Colorado. So this is a picture of the first confirmation class and a building at Zion in Fort Morgan, Colorado. So we enter another state then in the 1930s. So by the time you get to, again, World War II intervenes, it's hard to start a lot of churches then. Not many churches are being built, not many new buildings in the 1930s or 40s. I think Atonement would have been a rather big exception to have a building built in the 1930s. But by 1949, this is what the Synod map looks like. So you can kind of see, we got that outlier in Arizona. We've got a church got some churches in Colorado. We got the Pacific Northwest, and then kind of, across the upper Midwest. That's where we have congregations. And I believe it's something like 14 states in 1949. We'll add 2 states during the 1950s. The first state will be California in 1950. We kind of had, I mentioned sometimes with the Missouri Synod, trying to have a relationship with, trying to work together with them because we're in fellowship with them, and trying to respect each other's areas that we're working in. And so you can see that in some places in Wisconsin. For example, I mentioned in Manitowoc has 4 WELS churches, and then 2 out in the country, and then 2 in Two Rivers. The Missouri Synod has 1 in Manitowoc. Sheboygan, on the other hand, we have 1 church in Sheboygan. We have a church out in Sheboygan, or Howard's Grove, outside of the city. Sheboygan is owned by the Missouri. I mean, they got all sorts of churches in Sheboygan. So you can kind of see where there were some territorial decisions made there. That was true with some states as well. So there was kind of a handshake, gentleman's agreement. Wisconsin, you guys take care of Arizona, and the Missouri Synod will take care of California. And this was decided way back in the 1906 or 07, something like that. And so that kind of held true. The Missouri Synod did not get a church in Arizona until like 1930, and it was the last state they entered. We will finally enter in 1950. And the Missouri Synod was fine with us coming in 1950. In fact, they helped, even though we were, by 1950, tensions are starting to increase between us and the Missouri Synod. But their missionaries there, their pastors there were saying, there's so many people here, there's plenty of room to work. And so in 1950, 2 pastors will go there to California, Armin Keibel and Frederick Knoll. And their first area they're going to focus on is going to be Los Angeles area. And California, you have to understand, was just booming. All these people who had moved there during the war for either military or for defense work, factories and so on. And, you go to California, particularly Southern California, and if you're there in the winter, you kind of say to yourself, I can handle this. And you can question my sanity. I know Professor Cuck has more than once, that I served in San Diego for 5 years, and then I took a call to Minocqua, Wisconsin. You can question my sanity if you want. But Los Angeles is where we're going to get started. And this was a little brochure or kind of, pamphlet that the Wisconsin Synod put out in 1952, kind of promoting among the Synod what was going on in Los Angeles, and had that cool map to the right. And it gave details about, what's California like, what's Los Angeles like in this brochure for Midwesterners who, what's California like? It's this foreign place, lots of sunshine. But so they decided to start. We got 2 churches that got started there then: St. John's in Tarzana and Gethsemane in Los Angeles. St. John's has since closed, but the church Gethsemane has changed its name to Hope Lutheran, but it is still in the same location. And they built a church building there pretty quickly, and this is a picture of their Vacation Bible School and their Vacation Bible School teachers in this is probably 1953 or so. And their church was growing so fast, and they started a school, that they actually had to do another building project and build a new sanctuary in 1957, 58. So things grew quickly, and they became self-supporting church. And pretty soon, as you can see, there's other guys in the picture. We're adding some pastors there too, and adding some locations. So another church that'll get started pretty quickly will be Our Savior's in Pomona. And the pastor there will be a guy named Paul Hine, who will eventually be the mission board chairman out there. And eventually he moved to the San Diego area to serve a church, Shepherd of the Hills in La Mesa, California, suburb of San Diego. My father vicared for him in 1967, 68. And then the next year, the vicar was Mary Prange's brother-in-law, Kurt Lyon, vicared there. Because when I got to San Diego, it was kind of fun. I went to an LWMS rally that I presented at, and some little lady came up to me and gave me a bulletin. And I opened it up, and I saw Kurt Lyon was the vicar. And in the announcements was an announcement of my father's assignment to Iowa from the seminary, an announcement of my birth. Because I was born at the end of May. My poor mom didn't get to go to my dad's seminary graduation because she was recovering from giving birth to me. But it's just kind of interesting, these I didn't know what to be more amazed about, that the fact that the woman still had the bulletin, that she knew where it was, and that she made the connection with me. I didn't know which one to be more amazed about, but she was a very organized person, though. So we get going in California, and then pretty soon, we're starting, there's people up in Northern California, Wisconsin Synod transplants from the Midwest who are living up there, some people who are getting concerned about, because normally what you do, you transfer to a Missouri Synod church. Well, there's people who are getting concerned about where the doctrinal situation is going in the Missouri Synod, so they're asking for Wisconsin Synod pastors to come up and help. So some of these Southern California guys were going up to Northern California to help and serve as they could. There was an article in Northwestern Lutheran in 1958 that just has a really neat quote by Paul Hine. And what I love about this is he's trying to put this in terms that Midwestern Wisconsinites could understand, Wisconsin Synod folks could understand, where he says, if one of the pastors in Watertown would conduct his services on Sunday morning, then drive to Milwaukee and take a plane to St. Paul, Minnesota, where someone would pick him up, meet him and take him to New Ulm for an evening service, you would say that would be fantastic. Yet the same and greater distances were traveled in order to provide those people in Northern California with Sunday services. So you had these guys down in Los Angeles area. They would drive to the airport after church, head up to San Francisco area or Sacramento area. Often it'd be fly to San Francisco, drive over to Sacramento to do services. You see Paul Hine trying to put that in perspective for Wisconsin people. But I think he's trying to help people see that, look at the sacrifices that are being made. And I think getting Wisconsin Synod folks to say, I think we need to support the Synod so we can get some pastors out there. And eventually they do. By the end of the decade, they got a couple pastors up in Northern California and like 3 guys in Southern California. So we've entered another state. Florida, and by 1954 then we started the Arizona-California district. Got started in 1954. So there's district number 9. This is their district presidium and other officers elected at that 54 convention that actually met on the Apache reservation. Their earlier organizational meeting, was in Grace, Tucson. That's that picture. But then these guys this picture was taken on the Apache reservation. Next place can be Florida. A lot of people moving down there too. A lot of Wisconsin Synod people are spending winters down there. Can't imagine why. It's also, once they figured out air conditioning, it becomes a more appealing place. And the story of going to Florida was interesting because it starts with a layman, this guy, Louis Ott. He was a member at St. Bartholomew's in Cucullin, Michigan. Cucullin is kind of between Bay City and Saginaw. He was on the district mission board, and he wintered down in Florida. And he kind of says, there's a lot of Wisconsin Synod people down here who would really like to be served by Wisconsin Synod pastors. And so what can we do? here was the problem, though. The Wisconsin Synod, the Synod Mission Board, had a policy that you could not hopscotch states. So you could only work in a state where we had churches adjacent. So California was okay because we were already in Arizona. But there aren't any churches. You know, the closest church to Florida is Ohio, and there's a lot of states between Ohio and Florida. There was, the Michigan District Mission Board, though, saw a loophole. They said, oh, wait, we can explore, though. We can, like, check things out. And so in February of 1954, the three pastors on the District Mission Board went down and met up with Louis Ott, and they traveled around the state of Florida for about 10 days there, exploring, looking for places, you know, what kind of opportunities might there be here in Florida for starting some churches, doing some new mission work. Now, the Synod Mission Board didn't take too kindly to this necessarily, and there was some pushback. In fact, when they gave their report at the Michigan District Convention, this is also another quote I just love. This is the Michigan District Mission Board reporting to the Michigan District Convention. The members of the board resent the inferences, not all of which were in jest, that this trip was an expense-paid vacation in Florida. And by the way, they went on this trip in February. St. Paul explored mission fields, too, on expense money provided by the church in Philippi, and no one today thinks he was on vacation. One does not relax and rest while traveling 1,400 miles in 8 days and checking city after city for mission possibilities. The survey was made in all earnestness. So, you know, just get off our backs already. Come on. The Michigan District Mission Board was so excited about the possibilities here. In fact, Louis Ott was so excited that Louis Ott actually bought a couple of lots in St. Petersburg, Florida, and the Michigan District Mission Board went ahead and called a pastor to serve there who happened to be Louis Ott's pastor at St. Bartholomew's in Kekaulan, Michigan, William Stye. And William Stye went down there as the first pastor and formed the first congregation in Florida, Faith in St. Petersburg, Florida. The Synod eventually got over it. You read some of the correspondence, and there's accusations about being disorderly and this, that, and other thing. And finally, they had a sit-down meeting, and I think they aired all the grievances and hugged it out, I guess, and forgave each whatever. And the Synod took over the mission support, but it took a while. There was a little bit of hard feelings there for a bit. But by the time we get to the late 50s, we've got, you know, there's Faith, and there's the group that he has. So again, these churches are going to grow pretty quickly, become self-supporting, add a couple of pastors, James Vogt, and I think it's Kaiser was another pastor that ended up going down there. We started a church in Bradenton, Florida, which had relocated a few years ago and is now Peace in Trinity, Florida, I believe. If I oh, that's Holiday. That was the Holiday. Anyway, we got churches growing in Florida, and pretty soon we're going to have things going there too. So by the end of the 1950s, and as we break with the Missouri Synod in 1961, this is what I'll get to that in a sec. Oh, I got a couple of other things to go first. As this is all going on, we started doing some work cross-culturally in the United States as well. The first one will be down in Tucson, reaching out to Hispanics. This was like brand new kind of thing for the Wisconsin Synod. And it just so happened that a pastor in Flint, Michigan, Venus Winter, had kind of taught himself Spanish just for kicks. And his wife had died. He was a widower. He had a 12-year-old daughter yet. And the Synod decides we're going to start Hispanic work, and here was the perfect guy to take the call. And so he goes down to Tucson. He's kind of starting from scratch. This is new thing. But eventually you'll end up with a school there even, San Pablo they called it, down in Tucson. That work is not going on anymore, but it certainly was the first effort that has continued. My brother, for example, I'll talk about his church. He started a church, and he's done Hispanic work his whole ministry. Used to be at St. Peter's for a little bit, was in Phoenix, now is in the Twin Cities working on that. We also started some work in some of the cities, or the African American communities in Milwaukee and Minneapolis and Detroit. So St. Philip's gets started in the mid-1950s as a mission to the black community in Milwaukee. Kind of interesting, they started out, their first building was kind of a factory or warehouse that they converted to a church, but then they ended up getting old St. Matthew's Church on 10th and Garfield, which St. Matthew's relocated to where they are now. So they got that building for a while. Then some other, I think it's Bethesda, I think is one church they had, until they eventually landed where they are today. There was a St. Philip's in Minneapolis that for a while existed. It doesn't anymore, but for a while that existed. And same with Zoar in Detroit. So there were efforts in the 1950s and 60s to reach out to the African American community through our mission work there in those places. And so then you get that. That kind of work has continued. You think of how we have work among the Hmong. I served when I was at First German in Manitowoc. We were one of the first congregations that started doing work with the Hmong community in Manitowoc. I remember baptizing a family once of like 6 or 7 kids, and I just hoped that they were standing in the right order that I had them on my piece of paper, their names. But that work is continuing in Manitowoc even today. There's Trinity Hmong Lutheran Church that uses First German's building, and they have a church of about 170 or so members themselves, and they're actually training, one of their members is in our Pastoral Studies Institute at the seminary, and he's actually vicaring at First German and Trinity Hmong, doing both. So he's vicaring, doing Anglo work and doing Hmong work. This is a picture of a group in Minneapolis area, Manuel Hmong Lutheran Church. Hispanics, this is St. Thomas. This is the church my brother got started, Santo Tomas in Phoenix, that my brother was working on. And yeah, so cross-cultural work, our synod kind of got started back in the 40s, but has continued on. 1961, this is the synod convention. It was held at the new Wisco gym. Wisco's gym was only Wisco's building was only a couple years old. And this was the synod where we broke with the Missouri Synod. When that happened, there were concerns both within and without in the synod that we were going to just kind of shrivel up and die because we are not with the big old Missouri Synod anymore. Can we stand on our own 2 feet? There were legitimate concerns about that. And I think, we were struggling at the time. There were some financial challenges. There were also especially some manpower challenges. These are the 16 states we were in, by the way, in 1961. Keep that map in mind. 16 states in 61. Manpower challenges. Oscar Naumann is now the president. And O.J. Naumann says the manpower shortages in our home missions has led us to realize that we must extend ourselves, serve vacancies, serve multiple parishes, for the pure word and the sacraments rightly administered are the important thing, not the time of day when our services are held. Kind of get the idea. It's like, you might not be able to have church at 8 o'clock when you want it. You might have to have it at 10:30, so another pastor can come to your church. Just that kind of thing. And just other mission board reports were filled with these kinds of quotes. We need workers. And one of the reasons why we were short of workers at that time, because of the tensions with the Missouri Synod, and we didn't break until 61, some students and pastors had left to form the Church of the Lutheran Confession, the CLC, so a break-off group. Some had gone to the Missouri Synod. So our graduating classes in the early 60s were very small. Like, we had one class, I think, of only 15, another class of 19. That just isn't going to get it done. But by 1965, our classes were up closer to 30, and then they just continued to go up for the next, basically, 2 decades. That into the 1980s, our classes were in the 50s and even low 60s. So the manpower shortage is eventually going to be taken care of, but initially it's a little slow. So we start, where are we going to go? There's going to be some continued mission work in the heartland, of course. So you look at a map like the one on the left, and it shows all sorts of different missions that are getting started in the 50s and especially 60s. Places like Christ the Lord Brookfield, Star of Bethlehem, Bethlehem, Menominee, and Pilgrim and Menominee Falls. All sorts of different places. Michigan's going to have all sorts of, and Ohio. Just really a time where we're trying to start more missions, but it's not going to be only in the heartland, because the Synod, well, here's a picture of Crown of Life, Hubertus. That'd be another place that got founded in the 60s, early 70s. Ray Wickman there is the, in 1963, he takes the call to be the first home mission administrator. And he says this: we have requests for the means of grace from the states of Virginia, Georgia, Indiana, Missouri, Texas, Kansas, Alaska, and from Canada. The Synod was getting flooded with requests for faithful confessional Lutheran pastors, concerns about the Missouri Synod's drift, Wisconsin Synod people who had transplanted there, in different places, and were requesting, send us someone, we can start a church here and then do mission work from there. And so you're going to just see the Synod blossom. I mean, Florida, there'll be more places in Florida, as you can see, down in the south, along the west or east coast there. This was produced in I think it was 63 or 64, called White Fields. Again, another kind of pamphlet that gets sent out throughout the Synod, and all those dots are indicating missions. And you notice a few new states: Texas, Kansas, Missouri. And so by 1965, Texas here, we got a few places, Dallas, the Houston area, San Antonio are going to be places where you'll see missions. So by 1965, we've gone from 16 states to, I think it's 25. It's just phenomenal how fast our geographic spread is taking place. And it's in the late 60s, and I should point out, so some of the places we're going to be up in the East Coast, so places like Falls Church, Virginia, Pennsylvania, East Brunswick, New York, up into Massachusetts, places that those congregations still exist today, actually, in many of those places. This is a picture of a couple of places in Falls Church and in Baltimore, Atonement in Baltimore. Graduate from last year's class, Caleb Kelpine, got assigned to be the new pastor at Atonement in Baltimore. So these churches are still existing. Alaska, this is Eagle River, Alaska. The man there and his wife, a vicar, seminary student who got sent out there, and that's their church building, a double-wide trailer. That's Mark Brown and his wife. So anybody who has gone, any WLC, I saw somebody stand up with attention. WLC? Yeah, that's Mark Brown as a vicar out there. This is one of those great pictures that's going to be in our pictorial history book, by the way, which has just been, I found it this week, has been printed. So if you pre-ordered it, you might be getting your copy in the next month or so. This is Casper, Wyoming, Lord of Life, Casper, Wyoming. So we're, again, just to be a Wisconsin Synod member in that era must have just been fascinating. All of a sudden you're hearing about all these new places where we've got churches that we had not been before. And so by 1973, we've only got like 6 states left that we haven't been in. And there kind of was a mantra, every state by 78, because we like things that rhyme, right? Every state by 78. We didn't quite make it. We almost did. We didn't get to our last state until 1983. So almost made it. But by 1973, there's enough churches, especially in that southeast area. And I should maybe also point out something on this map. So basically, everything, if you take Lake Michigan and go straight south to the Gulf of Mexico, all of that east of that was part of the Michigan district. Isn't that fantastic? Texas across was all part of the Arizona-California district. Southeastern Wisconsin, I think, included Louisiana, maybe? I forget now how that all divided out, but it's just weird how those districts were, how they were trying to function then. But the South Atlantic district will get formed in 1973. And so you can see we had states in Tennessee, a couple congregations in Tennessee, Georgia, not Johnson City quite yet. That doesn't come until the 1990s, early 1990s. Florida, though, South Carolina, a few, and so on. So that was beginnings of the South Atlantic District. So now we're up to 10 districts. It'll be a decade later. Oh, there's Ray Wickman. He was the first president of that South Atlantic District because he had taken a call to Florida. We get to our last states by 1983. Today, we are in, well, it depends on how you want to count. We have congregations in 46 states. We have missions, like preaching stations in Mississippi and Maine. We do not have churches congregate or any kind of presence in West Virginia or in Rhode Island. We had one in West Virginia. We had a couple in West Virginia, but they closed. We had one in Rhode Island, but it moved across the border to Connecticut. The church relocated. So those are the only states that we don't have any kind. We have a little preaching station in Columbus, Mississippi, and we have a preaching station in Portland, Maine. So that's kind of where we're at today. But in 1983, we had churches when Paul Yankee got assigned to start Beautiful Savior in Portland, Maine. That was the last of the 50. And then in 1983, we get our last two districts. We get the South Central District. That's the group there. They met in Calvary and Dallas in 1983. And then the North Atlantic District and Walter Beckman, pastor at Falls Church, longtime pastor at Falls Church, was elected as the first district president. Kind of interesting, some of those outlying districts have not had many district presidents in their history. In fact, I believe the South Central District since 1983 has had 2 district presidents, Vilas Gillespie and now Don Patterson have served. So that's been longevity there in the district presidency. I think in North Atlantic, I think they're on number 4. 3 or 4? 4. Walter Beckman, Joel Peterman, Don Tollefson, and now Michael Seifert. Yeah, so 4. But, Norman Berg was the home mission chairman or administrator for many years. And reflecting back on when our synod was 125 years old, he wrote an article in the Wisconsin Synod Quarterly. And I think this is interesting. It perhaps also could be that the very necessary and intense concentration during the late 40s and 50s on the intersynodical doctrinal struggles with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod engaged our primary efforts and strength. That just really consumed a lot of time and effort and energy in our synod at the time. But from this struggle, however, arose a very strong sense of confessional identity, which is essential both to a sound but also a vigorously lay-supported mission program. The offerings that came into our synod in the 1960s and 70s are staggering, because not only were we going into all this home mission work, we'll talk next week about the world mission work, but as you might recall from last week, the 1960s and early 70s saw a lot of building projects on the ministerial education schools too. So there was a major offering in the late 60s called Missio Dei that raised more money than they were expecting, several million. So they're just, the lay people of the Wisconsin Synod really stepped up. And it kind of showed that, yes, we could stand on our own 2 feet after the break with the Missouri Synod. Mary? What? Oh, member here at, okay, sure. I think there were a lot of people who were members of Atonement who had synod positions over the years. But so that's kind of where I'm stopping, partly because of time, because I've gone way over again. But from here in the 80s, now, mission work continues. Places like Tennessee and all sorts of different areas around the country. We could have talked about some churches up in Canada, and now we're in the middle of, or the beginnings of starting 100 new missions in 10 years. Kind of a push for doing that to keep that mission mindset going, to keep us, even as maybe in some places congregations are contracting or even having to close or merge. yet in new places, where people are, we're trying to continue our mission efforts here in America. So, any other questions? I know I've kept you way longer than I should have. Sorry about that. Sure, please.
Where did you say Peace Lutheran Church where Mark Brown was at?
Eagle River, Alaska. Eagle River, Alaska. I think it was Peace Lutheran. Still there, still church there. Not in a double wide anymore, thankfully. But I think it was like a summer vicar there because they did some of that kind of stuff. So, thank you for being here and putting up with me. I should make one quick advertisement. Next Saturday, if you want to come to another presentation and hear me talk on something else, 175 years of change in WELS worship. I'll be doing this. So it's a WELS Historical Institute presentation at the Salem Landmark Church at 10 o'clock if you're looking for something to do on a Saturday morning. So I gave this presentation at the WELS Worship Conference, so it's kind of a repeat of that. But if you want to come, and I do have Atonement in that picture of Atonement, because I look at architecture and hymnals, so architecture especially, and we'll talk about Atonement as an example of 1950s architecture. Interesting, there's a number of churches that look the same, kind of very similar, and then Kevin Poston helped me realize that they were all by the same architect. Shocking. So, well, thanks, and close with the blessing. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all. Amen. You have a wonderful week.